So I want to talk about current events, and by current events I'm referring to the so-called Panama Papers. And I want to quote, or at least try to quote, the famous Justice Learned Hands. And in his testimony given, he had talked about the fact that something to the extent that no American has a constitutional duty to increase their taxes and tax base. I'm sure I butchered it up, but you get the point and you know where I'm going with this. And this is really related back to freedom of choice and this nasty and really ignorant phenomenon in this country of labeling and labeling without any information and just sort of spraying this label of something that we know very little about, whether it is or isn't relevant. So I'll let you take us from here.
Well, the Panama Papers is another example of active journalism, and it was assorted and put together by the International Consortium of Research and Investigative Journalists, and it's published up on the website, and it's open now. If you go under PanamaPapers.com, you're going to find it all, and virtually everything that had been taken from the Mossack Fonseca law firm in Panama has been published online. Now, I've got a couple of questions that always come to mind right off the bat. Here we seem to have no problem with publishing 11 million pages of other people's information that was protected by attorney-client privilege in a law firm. And of those 11 million pages, where they've been able to find maybe 1,000 to 2,000 pages that are interestingly related to various personalities we know, like Venezuelan governors and rap groups and some outfits that are terrorists in Guatemala and things like that. Okay, I guess that's sort of interesting. But no one has even yet said who the hell had the temerity to violate the other 10 million people's rights by going into a law firm and stealing all their files and publishing it. Now, that's got a lot of cheek. And if there's any shocking element there, that would be it. My contention is if there's one innocent person that didn't deserve that false light on them in that entire bunch, I think they have the right to sue everybody. And I don't just mean the law firm. I don't know how those things were purloined out of there, but that's a crime in most states. How would you like it if all of your legal matters that you've ever done with your lawyer or your CPA were just purged out and published all over the internet? And if you think it's fine, then I can give you a web address, and I'd like you to send me all of your tax returns, all of your business dealings, every business agreement you've ever entered into in your entire life, and I'll be glad to publish it out there for you so everybody can read it. And then I'm going to ask you, you don't see anything wrong with that? So I start off here with the concept of privacy in this country. You know, I know that the internet has this thinking that everything should be wide open and what anybody thinks should be posted on a wall. You can say things about people on the internet that if you said it to them personally, you'd probably go to jail. You certainly could be sued for it, but there's some internet protection about just saying anything that comes to your mind. And using racial epithets even, I've seen those, religious epithets, it seems like anything goes if it's the internet. And of course, I don't think that, I think that's really a giant retreat backwards to voyeurism about wanting to constantly look into everybody else's business, their bedroom window of their life, and see what's going on in there as though you were invited or as though you have any right. I'm amazed that people in this country have forgotten the concept of privacy. And do remember, of those 11 million, probably about 10 million are completely innocent and don't need to have their rights and their interior operations of their lives and their finances blasted all over the internet, including those that give information for which they could be terribly harmed if mined by some of the really nefarious dark forces that are out there on the internet. Look, we spend a fortune every day trying to protect ourselves and our financial information from being hacked. This is the biggest hack in history, and it's going to damage a lot of innocent people. And believe me, if I was a crook out there, I'd be mining all those papers and reading every single one of them to see if it gives me a tip on where I can go masquerade myself as somebody and steal their money in Geneva or you name wherever it is that they happen to put their money. And I think that's where it's going to go. The states, by the way, as they started digitalizing court records, Most of the states realized as they were digitalizing things like divorce decrees that showed where the accounts were and what the account numbers were, that crooks were logging on and starting to mine that information and using it for nefarious purposes. And so after all that expose and being open and transparent on the internet, all it really did is benefit the crooks. It sure didn't do anything for the innocent people except make them victims. So I'm generally concerned about the release of all of those papers from the standpoint of privacy. And then, as you and I were talking before we went on the air today, I'm always reminded of this concept that I hear again and again, but usually I heard it out of places like Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, which is, if you don't have anything to hide, then why do you object that we follow you, peek in your window, look into your checking account, investigate you top to bottom if you don't have nothing to hide? Obviously, if you don't want all of your affairs published on the internet, you must be up to something nefarious, right? Wrong. I just want my right to privacy. Why do I want everything about me all over the internet? I can see the point, and I can see why a lot of people are frustrated. And by the way, there's a movement now. A lot of the people who did have their papers published, they're going for their lawyers, the innocent ones, and they're going to sue the living crap out of everybody, including probably the journalists that publish it. So this one is only in chapter 1 of about 10 chapters. But as to the Panama Papers themselves, here's what they tell us. Gosh, people like giant corporations, the Fortress 5 banks, the biggest insurance entities in the world, even De Beers, the Diamond King, actually go out and put their money in places where they pay less taxes and have less publicity and aren't exposed then to someone logging in and learning everything there is to know about them and using that to some financial advantage. Yes, there's actually people out there that want that right. Does that make them crooks? Gosh, I certainly hope not. And it doesn't. In fact, they're talking about the exceptions and making it the rule. The very fact that I go offshore and put my money in an account, did you know, for instance, that probably your 401k has at least 3 or 4 accounts that you're making money out of that are offshore? A lot of these now are buying bonds from Europe. They're all offshore. And the reason they're buying those bonds is because they pay high yields. Does that make them all illegal? Does it mean it's the product of slavery, prostitution, and drug running? No, it just means that they happen to be offshore. We've globalized. You know, the chances are you're going to be doing business with somebody online that's out of China today. Is that terrible? Right now, most of your transactions through places like Target and some of the others are cleared through China and Indonesia. Is this like a conspiracy now? No, it's called globalization. We've got to realize that the world is just a lot bigger than our own little house and our driveway and the little car we take to work every day and our workplace. So, yes, global people have global reach, and they set up global entities. Now, right now, as you know, one of the big pushes has been that the United States is running out of money. That's why its reserves keep going down and its national debt keeps going up. And so there's been a great big push to collect more tax money. And the way to do that is to go find those scofflaws that might be hiding it elsewhere and offshore. That's always been illegal. Yes, criminals hide the swag from ill-gotten gains. And the policing authorities generally do a pretty good job in finding it. But that's talking about illegal gains. Because they take it and put it in offshore accounts doesn't mean that anybody in an offshore account is a crook or that whatever's in it is an illegal gain. No, it just means that these people tend to go ahead and hide their swag. They steal and then they go hide it someplace. And that's common and it's done all the time. It's been done since the dawn of man. And the policing authorities are pretty good about getting it. Now, lately, there has been a push by the revenue authorities and the U.S. Department of Justice to put pressure on all of these haven countries to start disclosing who all it is banking there. And they're doing a pretty good job of that, and most of the countries sooner or later are signing on, even those old tax havens. I think about the only one that hasn't signed on to the FinCEN agreement and treaties to disclose any and all Americans that are investing there or anybody else that's investing that's not a native to the revenue authorities and the Department of Justice has been Nevis. It's about the only one. The rest of them pretty much have fallen in line. Look, even Geneva has fallen in line. The Swiss now, numbered banking accounts are not going to be a hiding point anymore for those that have money. And you know what's so funny is, of all of the Swiss accounts that they opened, which were many under an order that was obtained about 4.5 years ago, there was somewhere in the neighborhood, if I recall correctly, of about 750,000 Swiss accounts that were opened. And of all of those open, they found about 10,000 people that were not doing as they're supposed to do, that there was something nefarious. Out of all of those, a very, very small percentage. And others just simply wanted to bank there. The yields are good. It's a confidential banking, so people don't know what your net worth might be, because people tend to get preyed on when they have high net worth. And it was offshore, so that it's going to maybe have some implications in the event they moved or passed away outside the country. Many people have multiple residences. I'm sorry, yes, there are people that actually have more than one home in life, and they use these for convenience. And some people even use them for being dual citizens, like Canadians that come here periodically, and as you know, drive a lot of our economy. And their money comes from typically accounts out of in Canada that are not open. Canada does not open all that information to people. So they're confidential accounts, and they invest in our country. So what? This does not make them criminals. And if we start getting to that point, we're going to have people afraid to do business with us. And we do need those kind of resources. I really feel sorry for this law firm. I think it's been exposed to a lot of terrible liability. And I noticed that it's pulling back. In the newspaper yesterday, it said that one of the areas that it had set up mini corporations was Nevada, and it's pulled back and resigned from about 1,000 of accounts, and it's closed 3 or 4 offices. I think it has to. This has been, for them, it's just been a disaster of monumental proportions. Law firms are not supposed to allow confidential information to escape. And by the way, even confidential information about their criminals. Look, you go to a lawyer, and the lawyer says, you know, you've been accused of defrauding the tax authorities, or you've been accused of burglary, or you've been accused of running a red light, and they're going to fine you terrible, and they're talking about putting you a year in the can for that. And you say, God, I'm sorry, you know, and you're right, they probably can, I did do it. Do you really think that when your lawyer says, well, then maybe we better try to make a deal, do you really think all that information ought to be put in the press the next day? You think it ought to be put on the internet, all your confidential admissions to your lawyer? What faith would you ever have in a lawyer again? You couldn't talk to one, or your accountant, for fear that the next day everybody's going to be reading it on the internet. No, you have that kind of privacy. You're supposed to be able to have that attorney-client privilege so that you can go in there and tell them some of the most, especially in divorce work. I used to do that years ago. Wow, you hear stories that make your hair stand on end. Are those really stories that should be all over town the next day? I'm sure all of those little voyeurs that want to know what everybody's doing, those little busybodies, would be glad to know about it, but that doesn't make it right. You've got privacy rights. You have to have the ability to go to people that you can speak your heart to and tell them the truth and get some really frank advice without thinking that the very next day it's going to be in the front page of the newspaper or on the web page someplace, and everybody's going to be calling and laughing and ridiculing you, and you may get even more exposure because of that. So what do I think about it? I think that the whole release is a bigger crime than anything, and it's the bigger news. But the fact that we should go through 11 million records and find some scofflaws in it, is that so surprising? Really, I mean, I pretty much dare anybody that's got a business to give me their tax returns and let me look through them. And if I can't find an error in them someplace or a little sleight of hand that was used, I'll eat my hat, because there's one in every single one of them. In fact, even the software like Intuit that helps you do your tax returns, you don't want to take them to the CPA, you want to buy Intuit for about $109 for the deluxe model and do your LLC or your corporation or your personal taxes on it. Do you realize at the end it says, now do you want to run an audit advisory? Isn't there a key for that? And then you hit the key and it quickly looks through your return and says, you've got some things in there auditors would kind of look a little aside at. Would you like to see what they are and how they could be fixed? And then you hit yes. And it shows you how to do that. Does that make it a criminality? Now you're going to repair these things and get yourself back into order that fits the template that the revenue authorities want? Well, if it does, then there's criminal software all over the place, and we're all criminals. I know for sure. I count the best I can, and I tend to pay my taxes. But I know if you go back through my taxes, someplace there's going to be an error. Hell, there's an error in my checkbook, and I'm pretty good with math. But I'll be darned, I'm off a couple of bucks now and then. I'll tell you the biggest error I just committed here recently. This is crazy, but it just shows you. When you have a busy life, it's easy to commit errors. I didn't really know how old I was until about 2 days ago. I'm not kidding. I was actually telling people I was like a year or two younger than I am, and I honestly thought it. It's just because I don't have time to sit down and count anymore, you know. And one birthday looks about like the other. It's easy to make these errors, but it doesn't make you a criminal. And it doesn't mean that you should be exposed then to the scrutiny of the entire world and have all your private affairs, for whatever they may be, exposed to the planet. And the notion that because you don't want someone to look over your shoulder and take pictures of everything you do, let alone the entire world that's on the web doing that, doesn't make you sick. That doesn't make you a criminal. It doesn't make you have something to hide. It means you're merely rational, and you don't want that kind of country. That's why you live in America. Those were guarantees of privacy that we got by living here. That's why we're here. Those are our principal American reasons for being here and leaving countries like that and coming here where there is privacy and where you can talk to your lawyer and it's going to be protected, and you're not going to see your face and all your private affairs all over the internet the next day. Those are the things that I'm talking about. I think they're far more severe, and those are the things that are going to be tested by the Panama Papers. And as I say, we're only in Chapter 1. There's 9 more chapters to come of this. There's going to be lawsuits flying. And yes, I'm sure the revenue authorities are going to go out and use these and maybe find a few scofflaws out there and ding them. They probably would have got them anyway. But by far, the people whose rights have been abused are mostly innocent people that just plain had the sudden light put on them when they didn't ask for it. And those are the people that have rights, and they have rights to file lawsuits, and I think they're going to. That's the rumble out there. So there's my thinking on the Panama Papers. I think we're going to hear more about it. It's part of the expose thing now that dates all the way back to having people in our top security go out and publish papers that are internal ones about the operation of the security forces of our country. I mean, did anybody think that was right? If you can't tattle on the United States, why should you be able to tattle on your neighbor? And, of course, everybody thought that was atrocious and thought the man ought to be executed. The Snowden Papers is what I'm talking about. Now, you say, well, how can you make that comparison? Because it's really all about privacy and going on the net with things like that, that, as we already know, if anybody thought about it, it was all wonderful to put light on some nefarious things that the government was doing. But do you realize it's probably killed innocent people, operatives out there? It's impaired our interests nationally and abroad, and it's exposed all of our internal workings that are for our own security to protect our country and our families. And it's put a lot of those people at terrible risk and changed. It's even got some people killed, some undercover folks killed out there that were in the law enforcement world. So you have to think of the flip side on these. Disclosure is one thing, but the mischief that it does has to be balanced on the other end. Well, I think I've said my piece, Mark.
Thanks, Jim. I want to give you guys Jim's link. You'll see it down below, and you've seen it throughout the different voice and video calls that we've done with him. It's www.eckley, and that's ECKLEY law.com. And of course, to get in touch with us for your alternative credit and business finance needs, it's www.creditpathway.com. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you very much, Mark. See you now.